April 5, 1880, I was transferred to the cavalry and, as ranking captain, assumed command of Fort Huachuca, Arizona, a 3-company post only a few miles from the Sonora border. It was a favorite pastime of the Reds, for small parties of a dozen or 20, to break from the reservation at night and, after raising sundry and divers varieties of hell, to slip across the border and take refuge in Mexico, sneaking back to their teepees after the flurry of pursuit was over. It was the first day after I assumed command that I took my own troop out on the parade ground, put them through their paces, and gave them a thorough looking over to see what sort of an aggregation I had inherited. They were a rollicking lot of lads, not pretty to look at, but comfortable fellows to have at one's back when going into a scrimmage, as I learned upon more than one bitter day in the months that followed. After a few evolutions, I felt, rather than saw, what they needed. They wanted a master, wanted a leader whose word should be to them the law and the gospel, from Proverbs to Revelations. And by gad, sir, they found their man right there and then. Half of them didn't seem to know how to obey a command, and the other half didn't appear to be in any particular hurry. My subalterns, too, were apathetic, and inside of 10 minutes I knew that my work was cut out for me if I expected to make anything of Troop C. The only man in the company who seemed to know the game and wanted to play it by the book was the first sergeant. I spotted him at once and noticed that he not only understood and instantly obeyed a command, but that he mentally anticipated it, which showed me that he was letter perfect in tactics. I didn't waste a great deal of time in letting them know the lay of the land. As they wheeled into line by fours, the order was, "Halt, company front," and then, riding very slowly, I passed down the line, and over the head of his motionless horse I looked squarely through each trooper's eyes and down into the sub-cellar of his immortal soul. At the end of that slow riding, I knew my men, and they knew that I knew them. From that moment began the upbuilding of Company C, and before 6 paydays had passed, it was the best-drilled, best-natured, hardest-fighting troop that ever swung the saber or followed the guidon. As the company broke ranks, I could see that the men were speaking eagerly among themselves, evidently discussing their new old man. I had my eye on that first sergeant, and after stables that evening, I sent an orderly for him. A few minutes later, he strode up to the open door of my quarters, saluted, and stood at attention, waiting while I looked him over from end to end. He was a soldierly-looking chap, square-shouldered, well set up, long of limb and slender, and looked as hard as iron. But it was at his face that I looked longest. It was not a happy face. Some great sorrow or great disappointment had left its shadow there, but it had character written all over. Prominent cheekbones, a good nose and chin, with deep-set gray eyes that looked at a man, not past him. For a full minute he stood quietly returning my gaze, with never a flinch nor the tremor of an eyelid. "What's your name, Sergeant?" "Reynolds, sir." "How long have you been in the service?" "Nearly 3 years, sir." "Step inside, Sergeant. I want to have a talk with you." As he passed the threshold, he removed his hat, and right there his captain came very nearly committing an unpardonable breach of discipline, for the impulse came over me to get out of my chair and offer the gentleman a seat. For Sergeant Reynolds was a gentleman, as one could see the instant his hat come off and that magnificent forehead appeared in evidence.